So just another Friday national unity crisis for our party insiders. We've got Greg McEachern. He is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former National Conservative campaign manager. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. And we have reinforcements today. A special guest for today's conversation. Graham Thompson is a political commentator based in Edmonton. Graham, thank you for bringing some Alberta content to this conversation. I just wonder, what is the lay of the land? How is this playing out the day after Danielle Smith's big address on television saying this is going on the ballot October 19th?
Yeah, a lot of response from business people who do not like this, saying it's bringing uncertainty. But let me point something out really important. Smith is saying 700,000 Albertans signed different petitions to get this referendum going. No. The Forever Canadian petition, in other words, let's stay in Canada, got more than 400,000 people, but they wanted a vote in the legislature, not a referendum, a vote. And they were saying we want to stay in Canada very clearly. That was verified by Elections Alberta. Don't have a referendum, have a vote in the House. And Smith just sidetracked that into a committee and delayed everything. And also that 300,000 people who purportedly signed the separatist petition, that has not been verified by Elections Alberta. So Smith is bypassing all of that, just saying, making it sound like Albertans want a big debate. No, they don't. Most Albertans want to stay in Canada, 65, 70% according to many polls. Also, most Albertans do not want a referendum. They didn't ask for this. This goes back to Smith playing to a certain fringe element in Alberta politics that pretty much controls the UCP, that the governing party in Alberta. They want a separation. You've got people who actually want to separate, some who are thinking, let's just send a message to Ottawa and get more from Ottawa by threatening perhaps to separate. And by the way, the question in the fall is not to separate. It's actually to have a vote, to have another vote later down the road. So Smith is delayed. She keeps saying this shouldn't be kicked down the road. Let's deal with it now. She is actually delaying this even further.
Right. Well, the courts got involved, Fred, and so the Mitch Sylvester and Jeff Rath and others couldn't go ahead. And Danielle Smith said today the lawyers will not and the courts will not let her do what Jeff Rath wants to do, which is call a binding question herself, which is was where me and Rath disagreed when we spoke last week. But on this, with the business community upset, with the data leak, with the breach of privacy, is this a wise move to put this on the ballot with all of these conditions around it?
Well, look, there's obviously tremendous risk anytime you put the country at stake when you put a question like this that could lead to an eventual binding referendum. I look at this on the political side of it. I'm well familiar with the players on the separatism side. These are not strong organizers. These are not legitimate players right now. But you're giving them fuel, you're giving them a number of months to organize and to build something and to actually, because there will be people that will want to be a part of this, to vote to separate. So, when she talks about this, let's have this vote and get it over with, we'll never, as if that's it. Well, we've already had 2 Quebec referendums and potentially a third that the current PQ party is presenting. This doesn't mean you have a vote and this dies, it goes away. If you give it fuel, if you allow a movement to potentially to grow here where there could become, like there is no, go back.
You can solidify it and make it legitimate.
You can make it legitimate. Right? You could end up with more actual separatist political parties that could get a foothold, which they do not have. And federally, they've had one too, right? Go back to the 21 election. There was a separatist party federally, the Maverick Party. It was a fringe. It had some former members of parliament involved in it, Jay Hill. There is, it's there, but it's not getting off the ground. This gives a dangerous opportunity for something to actually grow there.
Mel, surprised to hear Avi Lewis and the Gang of Five being played as a force in this, but here we are. What do you make of what we've heard from the Premier in terms of the rationale of the approach she's taken here?
Yeah, it was really interesting, and kudos to you in that interview because you kept tasking her on, why are you still going ahead with this if you're saying that you want to stay in Canada and the reasons behind that. And to me, the way that she was responding, it sort of sounds like this is someone who, when the separatist movement was helpful to her, it was helpful to fuel that and to, use it to her advantage in order to get to where she's going. And now that has happened, she's kind of over her skis a little bit and is now going to have to figure out how to manage going forward. The question around, you just signed this MOU with the Prime Minister, and that being put at risk because of the business community is just it's a little bit bonkers to understand that you would put something that you've worked so hard for. She talked about working with Prime Minister Trudeau, talking about putting this on the paper with Prime Minister Carney. You're putting that completely at risk by going ahead with this, and not only going ahead with this a week after signing that MOU with the Prime Minister. It just seems nonsensical, and it also to credit with the interview, she was a good communicator in talking about why she was going ahead with this, but there was no real reason other than we said that we would listen to people, and now we're going to listen to people. There are a plethora of other ways to listen to people, and this is just a super extreme one.
So Greg, before I get to you, I want to just show something from one of the Liberal MPs, because the Prime Minister is treading lightly on this referendum, but one of the Alberta MPs is laying out exactly what he thinks about this. In a post on social media, Corey Hogan wrote in part, "The simple reality, a reality you would not find in her speech," her being the Premier, "is this. She has pushed along a question because her group has threatened to bring down her and her party if she does not. Her internal political problems have become our national crisis." Greg, what are your thoughts on that? That's a pretty unequivocal statement from Corey Hogan there.
Yeah, it's very well said. I mean, in her attempts to unify Alberta, she's unified us all with none of us can figure out what this referendum is actually about. I understand being allergic to commitment, but, a referendum to have a referendum seems a little odd. And now her political spectrum and her supporters are from the pipeline supporters to the 51st state curious. And I think she's really diminished herself this week. Mel and I both have talked about, she's a very, very able communicator. But Graham pointed out right away the issues when she keeps citing, the numbers that participated in this. It's like, it's self-defense that these people got involved. They care
the
about
400,000 assigned Tom Lukaszyk's thing, they'd be happy to have this go away.
Yeah,
or most of them, not all of them.
And I saw you raise that twice with her. I saw, I think it's Dwayne Brett, the political scientist, was on the hour before your show saying something similar. So there's a case when politicians get involved and they're running from municipal, they're going to go federal, things like this. The game changes. And so this is where things, like expectations, media training. I think that she has elevated herself, because Canadians really, really care, elevated herself to this another level of debate. And what she's bringing to the debate, it's not strong enough. It might be, she might have been able to push this stuff around, a couple of months ago, but now the stakes are higher and the questions are tougher when she's in a press conference. I don't think she looks as strong as she did. Look, if you are considered strong because you're in front of a mob and you're running towards Ottawa, but you're too scared to look over your shoulder and to say to the mob, listen, why do you want to separate? Do you know how much more power we have as part of a G7 country? I just got this MOU. We are finally getting here, and now you're jeopardizing it, because who is going to want to invest in our province if they don't know who the regulator is going to be, who owns the pipelines? What trade deals are you still going to be in if you separate?
What country will you be in, right?
Exactly.
All of these things. Yes, there is a free Barabbas approach to some of this direct democracy thing. But look, Corey Hogan, obviously a federalist, he's frustrated with what's going on. Even separatists are angry about this referendum. They say the question falls short of what they were pushing for, what they wanted. Jeffrey Rath, who we had on the show, says it's time for Danielle Smith to go. Don't make excuses for her. This is the most corrupt political move pulled by an Alberta Premier in my lifetime. And David Parker, who is behind the Centurion Project, says Danielle Smith has betrayed her base. Time for a new leader. Graham, those are fighting words. Normally you move on separatism, you have an election on it, you run on it, you make this a core part of your campaign, not the way this is happening. Is it really about this threat from those separatist groups taking her out that she feels the need to do this? Because Danielle Smith has gone as far as a court decision would allow with this move.
Yeah, she's still playing to them. The thing is, though, be careful. Could they force her out? Well, this goes back years ago, I think 4 years ago, when the party members, the fringe element, forced out Jason Kenney. And then they helped get Smith to become leader and then premier. And they're always asking for more, and she's always trying to give them more and more and more. The thing is, with Kenney, though, he was unpopular. The government was not doing well, post-pandemic. And there was people waiting in the wings. Ministers and cabinet waiting to take him out. And also, Danielle Smith was waiting, getting a campaign going to force him out. We don't see that here now. There's no one waiting in the wings. So the threat to her, she's actually said this basically in so many words, it could split the party, as opposed to forcing her out. You could see people start their own, as you mentioned before, sort of separatist party coming up. She said that's a real threat. Doesn't want to see that happen, so she's still playing to this base. But basically what's happening here, the tail is wagging the dog. You've got these very angry separatists and people who do not like the Liberal government. The thing is, though, this has started with Jason Kenney. He inflamed people. He said the lunatics are trying to
run the asylum.
Asylum when they turned against him. But she knows they can turn against her. Forcing her out, I don't think so. Starting their own party, potentially splitting the vote, it's a real fear for her. But she knows these are the people that she plays to at conventions. We have like 5,000 people who show up at conventions for her, and she is kowtowing to them. So the question is, why does she keep doing this? She's afraid for her own political future as well and survivability. And you can't underestimate that. Not necessarily a coup to force her out, but maybe splitting the party into at least, fragments. That's going to be a problem for her.
Right.
And how she deals with that is the thing is people looking at, what are you doing this for? This could backfire spectacularly on her. But quickly, I want to say the wording of that referendum, to have a referendum, of course, bypassing the courts, but also it's a way for her to reach out to Albertans. So I talked to a lot of them, a big article for a magazine on this, people who are not separatists within the UCP, but very cynical about Ottawa. They are telling me they wouldn't mind seeing a referendum just to shake things up. They don't want to separate, but they do want to get Ottawa's attention.
Ask Quebec what it shook up in terms of corporate headquarters and capital investment, right? Like, be careful what you wish for there, because they may have political influence in Canada, but they have an economy that requires a lot of equalization payments, and that is not necessarily where Alberta wants to be, is certainly my sense of it. But, Fred, the people keep talking about this as a fringe within her party, but then they also refer to it as the base. Is it really a fringe if it can force out Jason Kenney and force policy choices by Danielle Smith and potentially threaten to blow up the United Conservative Party so quickly after Humpty Dumpty got put back together again?
Yeah, I don't think we can compare the separatist movement to what took Kenney out as apples to apples here. There may have been elements
some overlap,
of it. There may be overlap,
right? Yeah.
but during Kenney was a post-pandemic premier who there was a lot of pent-up anger over the pandemic and other things what this government has done. There's a number of issues that that happened during the pandemic under his leadership that infuriated a lot of people, not just Conservatives, and his numbers were struggling. So there was, and he actually did win the leadership review. It was over 50%, 51 or 2.
Barely
not
enough.
Enough.
Yeah,
obviously not enough.
I know. We call that a D in my house.
Yeah, but he was in a tough spot then.
Yeah.
I don't think this is the same threat at all that he faced. And as I mentioned last week, Ralph Klein was the last premier in Alberta to win a second election.
That's crazy when you lay that out.
It's decades ago, right?
2006, I think, right? Like 20 years ago.
Yeah, and it is very, very challenging, on so many fronts. But I don't think that she, maybe this is a way she's trying to blow off steam and protect the base there, but the risks are just so extreme to go the other way. So she may be creating the monster she's trying to get rid of.
So, Mel, how does the federal government and federal officials respond to this? Because, the proof point, at least in the immediate term, was going to be, look, an MOU. We're going to work with you on this. We're going to work with you on Interties. We're going to work with you on data centers. And most importantly, we're going to work with you on a pipeline. All of that needs to be sent to the Major Projects Office by Canada Day, and then the promise is to have it designated a project of national interest by October 1. The referendum's October 19th. So how do you marshal all that capital in the absence of a clear answer on that question on whether Alberta wants to stay a part of Canada or not?
And when the next steps of this aren't actually in your hands, the next steps of this are in the Premier's hands and in Alberta's hands. So you don't actually get to say, here's what we're doing to accelerate this, because it's actually going to be the Alberta government who's doing that. So what do you do? I think you do similarly to what the Prime Minister did today, similarly to what Corey Hogan did today. That does not, I don't think, get posted without PMO approval. So the ability to have those Alberta voices speak up and talk about the importance of staying in Canada. I also think the thing that you also need to focus on is what does disinformation look like in this moment? What does those breaches look like, and what can you do federally, be it the Prime Minister or not, to not control some of that, because you obviously don't want to seem to.
No, you've got to limit some of the chaos out there.
Totally, because I always think of Brexit, and the number one Google search the next day in England being what is Brexit, and it's like, how do you vote on that without knowing that, right? And not to simplify it or to compare to that, but the disinformation is a million times worse now. AI is a thing that we can't control, don't know how to control, don't know how to take into consideration, and then consider the data breaches, which is problematic. I was happy to see, Jason Kenney and company put stuff out today talking about what their campaign is to stay in Canada. I think conservative voices, is helpful also. Obviously, Jason Kenney, whether folks trust him or not, is up to be questioned. But other folks that are part of that is important. I was hopeful that Pierre Poilievre took Fred's advice last week. I saw, the headline of "I'm going to campaign and tell everybody in Alberta to stay in Canada," and then he doubled down and said, "Well, Alberta's really divided because the Prime Minister is doing such a bad job."
Right.
So you can't really speak out of both sides of your mouth and be helpful. I think in that moment, in the same way that we advise as it relates to Trump, you say, I'm a Canadian, and that's it.
Okay, I want to show what Pierre Poilievre had to say, because just so we can hear him in his own words, because he says he will campaign for Alberta to remain in Canada, but he is pinning some of the blame for all of this on, of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney. Have a listen.
Conservatives love Canada. I love Canada. We're going to fight for a united Canada every day in every way. We're going to reach out to Albertans in every corner of the province to make the case for our wonderful country. I should just once again point out, though, how wonderful it was 11 years ago when there were no separatists whatsoever in Alberta, where the Parti Québécois and Bloc Québécois were wiped off the electoral map, and we were a truly united country under the leadership of Prime Minister Harper. He understood that it's the job of the Prime Minister to unite the country, and that if the country's not united, that too is the responsibility of the Prime Minister.
Okay, so...
Can I just say something quickly? We were so united under Prime Minister Harper that we got rid of Prime Minister Harper in 2015. That's how united we were.
Yeah, well, look, most political careers, they rarely end happy, right? Greg, just what are your thoughts on that? I mean, Mark Carney made his pitch today. Obviously, federal politicians, I don't think Pierre Poilievre is a separatist. I think he wants the country to stay together. But, he is going to do this dance where he criticizes Mark Carney, undermines the MOU that Danielle Smith is putting in the window as Exhibit A of why Alberta should stay. What do you make of it all?
Well, as Mel said, you're not really landing the message if you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth. But he did say something which was good, and it's kind of from a just straight politics. Had he done it prior to Jason Kenney calling out for Federalist voices to be heard, it might have had more impact. He's lucky he did it when he did, because now it's being folded into the media coverage, so he is getting some coverage of it, because he really hasn't gotten a lot. I mean, this is a guy who said about the MOU last fall it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, which put him very much offside the premier of the province that he is a federal representative for. The other thing, David, I just want to mention, picking up on Mel's point about misinformation and disinformation, this is why a lot of people have a lack of trust for Premier Smith, because following Jason Kenney getting removed and due to the pandemic, she said that people who are unvaccinated were the most unfairly discriminated people
amongst the most unfairly discriminated people in history.
Yeah, and I think there's some people from World War II that might have a different point of view on that. She also, during her town halls, she gives credence to things like chemtrails, and she talks about these town halls, and they are the ones that she's had so far have been really not all that legitimate in terms of their openness to all of Albertans. I mean, her executive director of her premier's office, got some earned media for picking on a teenager and criticizing him. So she's going to need to do better if she's going to have to try to look to be the person that she says she's going to be during an in terms of her anti-separatist view.
Yeah, look, we've had premiers in this country in the past put separatism on a ballot, but they've been separatists, right? It's never been a self-proclaimed federalist doing it, so we'll see where that goes. But, Graham, what do Albertans need or want to hear from federal leaders, from the people here in Ottawa? Like, what can... Well, certainly Avi Lewis is not going to help based on what the premier had to say. And Yves-François Blanchet, probably not so much, except as a how-to. But what can Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre say to make things better for the pro-Canada side in Alberta?
It's a good question because it sounds really simple, just stand up and talk about, how Canada helps Alberta and vice versa. The thing is, when you're dealing with logic, that separatists deal mainly in emotion and victimhood. And Smith has been inflaming that, and Kenny before her about, Ottawa's doing this landlocking our oil. She's actually used those terms when, in fact, of course, $34 billion in the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and they tend to ignore that. But there's a sense of victimhood and emotion that you can talk about logic and all the numbers you want, but it doesn't seem to penetrate the separatist mind think. The thing, again, the way she's worded this referendum, she's trying to draw in the people who are not separatists, but they're kind of cynical about Ottawa. I think that's going to perhaps inflate their numbers, not just the hard separatists, but those who are thinking, hey, maybe it's not so bad. We're not actually separating. We're just asking for a referendum down the road. Maybe that will get their attention. So I think
be careful with that, though.
Absolutely, but logic doesn't always work when someone's dealing with emotion.
So, Fred, on that, as someone who runs campaigns, this is not a persuasion campaign. This is a mobilizing campaign then, right? To mobilize the logical and the pro-Canada people to come out in big numbers to rebuke the separatist option. Would that not be the approach if you're a campaigner for keeping Canada together?
Yeah, I think persuasion is still a big part of it, though, because of the risk of the ballot
Sure.
question, where you can go.
But that hardcore
easily.
separatist group, you're not going to get, right? You're not going to get Jeffrey Rath to vote for staying in Canada, for example,
Of course not.
right?
Yeah. Well, of course not. But there is a huge segment of the population that could just say, hey, well, let's just, if we want to see if we can extract more from Canada with the threat, and of course, you're going to get a lot less. The Bank of Montreal is based in Toronto.
Yes, it is.
The risks of when you do this, and that's like the entire financial sector of Quebec moved and relocated. And you're trying to get things built in Alberta now. We're trying to get things built across the country, and putting this there in a place. And to your point about the MOU and all that, getting capital to invest has already been very, very hard, and it's what Carney is trying to undo so much damage of the last 10 years and fix things. And this just makes it much more challenging. But for electorally, yeah, I mean, it's going to be all in on mobilizing, getting people out, but you have to persuade them and let them know the risks, the damage that can be done economically. It's not just a simple, we could try to extract more. You could do tons of economic damage. If
Right, but essentially, if you don't want the separatist fire to catch hold, you got to stamp it out on October 19th, right? So, look, we only got about 90 seconds left. So, Mel, quick final thoughts for you, and then give Greg the last word.
Yeah, I do think that there is an opportunity, though, here to use emotion on the how do we stay here, because of course we know that folks who are more passionate about this may be on the Leave side, and that is way easier to mobilize people who are passionate and who really want to go to the vote, whereas people who are like, oh, it'll be okay, people will have my back. So the ability to also make sure that folks who want to stay are just as passionate and are just as showing up to the vote, because otherwise you risk not having people show up.
Yeah, and Greg, the 9 questions the government has put on the ballot on immigration and things, those are more appealing to the separatist, inclined side. That's the 99-cent 2-liter of Coke that gets people into the store, right?
Well, I mean, to Fred's point about companies that left, Gulf left Montreal for Calgary from Quebec. I mean, Albertans should remember that. I think people have to be careful, people like myself, that our criticism of Danielle Smith does not affect our view of Alberta. I want Alberta very much to be within Canada, and this is a chance for people to work, across party lines with Monty Solberg, Jason Kenney, whoever it is, to get that message out there, because whether it was the Charlottetown Accord or Brexit, sometimes these things become votes that they're not really about. And then, as Mel said, people are asking the next day, what does this mean?
Okay, so Graham, 30 seconds to you. How worried should the rest of, we're using rest of Canada now to describe not Alberta as opposed to not Quebec. How worried should the rest of Canada be about the next 5 months or so in Alberta?
If you asked me this question a month ago and said, don't worry about it, it's not going to, this won't work. They're going to fall on their faces. But because Smith has done so much to keep this alive, you're wondering, this may be an issue again, getting people on the fence maybe to follow her in the way the referendum is worded. I start to worry more. I still think a majority of Albertans do not want to separate, and going back to the point about getting people motivated to come out and vote, that's going to be really, really important. If that happened, it'll fail. Most Albertans don't want to separate. The problem right now is getting out the vote. You're going to have the NDP and others, and the Prime Minister, they're going to speak up more forcefully. The NDP certainly will in Alberta. But the question is, Smith is very astute and she's a great communicator. And so I wouldn't put anything past her in terms of how this turns out. It may come back to bite her either way.
Right.
But I think the thing is quickly, I always say Alberta politics never gets boring. It always gets more interesting and more convoluted. And this is just another example, only more so this time around.
Only more so. Well, look, on that optimistic note, we're going to let you all start your weekend. Graham Thompson, thank you so much for joining us here at the big table. Mel Richer, Greg McEachern, and Fred Delory.